Good morning. I am attorney Vince Davis, and I'm with my co host, attorney and certified family law specialist, Tamara Benefield. Good morning, Tamara. How are you?
Good morning, Vince. I'm doing great. Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching and joining. We have some good stuff for you today on domestic violence.
Okay, tell me about domestic violence and how it impacts family law cases here in California.
All right, Vince. So, what I'm seeing, especially this week, is that this topic is hot. People are filing, we're back to filing restraining orders against each other. And I'm getting a lot of calls asking me if the other side can really succeed in getting a restraining order for something as simple as sending a heated text message. Now, we've all been in relationships, they get emotional, and when you're in that breakup phase, people say a lot of stuff that they don't mean. But when you send it in a text message, it can land itself in court papers and be used against you to get a restraining order against you. Vince, a lot of people don't realize, and I'll let you answer this question. Can you get a restraining order from someone for sending a volatile text message?
I would say yes. It depends on the judge and the circumstances and the background, but just that plain question, yes, you can. You can get in trouble by threatening someone via text. Not only can you get in trouble, you can get a restraining order against you, depending on what you say. Like if you say, "Hey, I'm going to kill you," you can get arrested. I think it's a felony in California, so that's something that you definitely don't want to do. Um, Putting things in writing tend to have impacts that haunt us as time goes on.
That's exactly right. So you send the heated text message, you find out your boyfriend or your girlfriend is cheating on you, and you start sending them messages like, I will pull up on you, don't you dare, don't test me, don't try me, I'm coming to your house, blah, blah, blah. And people don't realize that, you know, restraining orders come with consequences, consequences that people just don't think about. So when you have a child that's involved, you may think, well, I only directed the comment against my ex. What does that have to do with the child? Well, everything. The law in California is so severe and so strict that you can not only get a temporary restraining order against your ex for doing something like this, but you can also obtain temporary sole legal and physical custody. Yeah, I know. Just sit with that for a minute. So, Vince, let's pause for a minute.
Mhm.
Um, how often do you see people using a restraining order as a custody grab, meaning a quick end run around instead of doing a long custody proceeding, but just filing a restraining order to just get immediate custody of the children? How often do you see that?
5 out of 7 days per week. I see it all the time.
And are they successful in getting it?
I'd say 95% of the time.
Hmm.
Occasionally I see temporary restraining order denials and that are served against, say, for example, one of my clients, the husband. And I wonder to myself, wow, this judge didn't give that temporary restraining order, because it's unusual. But if you say the magic words and say the right things, most judges, especially at the temporary stage, are almost compelled to give the wife usually that restraining order. So, I see it all the time.
Right. And it's hell on, yeah, and it's hell on earth. Well, if you're the parent who loses custody, even though it's only 20 days until the next hearing, usually you're not prepared to go to trial with that first hearing. You're granted a continuance. So it could be as much as 2 months before you see your children again for
Right,
something as little as sending repeated unwanted text messages. Now,
right.
you know, Vince, it just strikes me that a lot of things get. Are you there, Vince?
I'm here.
Okay, sorry. Um, so I was listening to a potential new client, and she was just kind of reciting how normal it was within her relationship. Um, how normal it was to yell, scream at each other, call each other names, send each other bad text messages. And of course, we'll show the text messages he sent to her to rebut or potentially even put a restraining order on him. That is something that you need to consider if you're accused of domestic violence. You need to consider filing what's called a cross restraining order, meaning to say, I'm not the only one who's abusive in this relationship. And what that can do is it can neutralize the presumption that one parent only gets sole legal and physical custody so that it shakes out to be 50-50. That's one strategy. But, in various communities, you find certain behaviors are just normalized. And, I'm just here to tell you, no matter how normal it feels, no matter how bonded you are to the trauma and the abuse of those relationships, it's still completely dysfunctional, unlawful, and can result in you losing custody of your kids.
Yes, it can.
Yeah.
And I don't think a lot of people realize that or think that is possible. A lot of people look at justice as if they were deciding from their own heart or from their own experiences. And what happens in a lot of cases, and I speak to a lot of men, what happens in a lot of cases is that they're shocked at what happens in a case. I know of a case recently where a young man, a husband, father, um, allegations were made. He claims they were false. She claims, well, maybe they're true. Maybe they're true. They arrest him and they give him a restraining order. And now he's got a criminal case and he's got a family law case,
Right.
and he was talking to me like, wait a minute, this is America. This isn't really happening to me. And, I think he's like 35 years old and he just didn't know the severity of these domestic violence cases.
Right. And this is America. And what that means is that people can deserve to live free of harassment, of abuse, of insults, of derogatory comments, free of being cussed out, free of being yelled at, free of being cornered into or backed into a wall, pushed, excessively arguing, things like that. I have a case where the young lady was complaining that he was arguing so much with her at night that he was keeping her up all night so that she would have to talk to him and couldn't get up in the morning to get to work.
Hmm.
That's amongst other things, spitting on the ground while he's talking to her, cussing, yelling at her, using his body to physically intimidate her, and she's like 5'2", he's 6'1", stuff like that. And when you have a criminal case going, the sad part about it is that it only prolongs the time that you're going to be away from your kid, because you have a Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. So the criminal case has to really shake out and go to disposition before you go back to the family law case. And if you find yourself and the judge says, no, I'm not going to delay this because your criminal trial is put off for 6 months and you have to go to trial in the family law court. If you raise the Fifth Amendment in defense to answering a question, the judge can make adverse inferences against you, meaning the judge can make the assumption that you did it, you're a liar, you should have a restraining order against you if you raise the Fifth Amendment. So in answering to certain questions. So it's dangerous stuff to be in these kind of toxic, volatile relationships. And it's even more dangerous for children because children are the ones who kind of involuntarily get hurt or unintentionally get hurt when couples are fighting.
One of the things that this young man told me was, hey, Mr. Davis, there was an argument, but the kid was upstairs asleep. They still arrested me. I still have a restraining order. I still have a restraining order in family law case, in the criminal case, and now some
Sorry.
social work. Bless you. Now some social worker is calling me, wanting to talk to me about a CPS case, and I don't understand because the kid was upstairs asleep. That doesn't
That's
make
right.
any difference. Unfortunately, you know, your common sense doesn't determine what the law is. And
That's right.
it doesn't matter if the kid is there because, it's not the fact whether the kid was there or not to witness the incident. It's the risk of it happening,
Right.
in the future.
That's
And
right.
that doesn't matter whether the child's present or not.
That's absolutely right. Where there's a substantial risk of harm to a child. And, people don't realize just all that excessive arguing that they do when they think the children are asleep. That that can land you not only a restraining order, but it can also land you in DCFS too. Do you
Right.
see a lot of crossover with these cases where you have a family law case that becomes a DCFS case with a criminal matter pending?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I may have never told you this, but that's how I got into family law.
Interesting.
It was a crossover case.
Mm-hmm,
I had a
mm-hmm.
guy who I represented in the CPS courts, DCFS, and he also had a criminal matter. I represented him in that. And then, voila, wife files a family law petition for divorce.
Yeah.
That was about 30 years ago, but the crossover is, I see it all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and it's that kind of thing where, what do they call it in hockey? A hat trick. You get three things going at one time. It can be devastating to you as an individual. It could be devastating because of the consequences, but carrying on one case or defending one case at a time is, quite a bit. Three
Yeah.
cases at a time, I mean, it's almost overwhelming
Mm-hmm.
because in most cases you might have three different attorneys. It's going to cost you three times as much.
Right, right. And so, what are some of the strategies if someone finds themselves accused of domestic violence? What are some of the strategies that you use or you would use to defend them?
The first thing I do, and oddly enough, this is probably the most difficult thing for people to do, and that is keep your mouth closed. Don't talk to social workers. Don't talk to investigators. Don't talk to the police. Because
Hmm.
invariably, they're not going to write down exactly what you said. They may twist it. And I've had many people tell me, well, the police officer is lying. That's not what I said. So don't
Right,
put yourself in that situation. Don't
right.
talk. And interestingly enough, I during this show, since we've started this show, someone texted me, and I told him in a DV situation, get in your car and drive away.
And
Now,
never return.
and I've told him this before. So it's
Yeah,
interesting that he's asking me the same thing, because our egos and our, the emotions and the psychologically get involved. Get in
right,
your car and drive away
right.
because there's too much going on between you and your partner.
That's right. That's right. Avoiding conflict is critical. Now, once the DCFS case or the criminal case resolve, um, I think it's super important to humanize the client and to put them in a context where they're in a toxic relationship, but it's bilateral, meaning it's not just him yelling and screaming, it's her too.
Hmm.
It's not just him miscommunicating, it's her too. It's not just him being pushing her, it's her too. And so I think it's really important if you don't have a criminal case pending against you or a DCFS case pending against you, to really deal with the allegations very specifically. And each and every one of them needs to be talked about. And you need to, explain to the judge what your side of the story is, you know. And I think judges do understand that when couples are breaking up, that's the most volatile time. Um, and when you're able to kind of couch it as, well, this was just a really bad breakup, it's unlikely to occur again in the future. this was a one-time event. Then with the time that elapses between the time you have a temporary restraining order and the time you get to trial, let's say that's 3 months, you hopefully your attorney can say during that time, my client never contacted, his ex, hasn't texted her, hasn't come by unannounced, hasn't pled for the relationship, hasn't sent her flowers, and he's unlikely to offend ever again in the future. I think judges are sensitive to those arguments versus, versus a case that, where someone, has a busted eyelid or something. Even those, I've seen cases where those situations are explained well as well. I had a guy defend and say that the reason why the wife, her glasses broke and her eye was busted out is because the wife was drunk. She was fighting with the neighbor. She was holding the child, and that in order to, safeguard the child, he grabbed the child and she inadvertently fell or something like that. So there's ways to explain this, but I think it's important to humanize yourself, tell the judge what you do for a living, tell the, build your constructive case. What kind of parent am I apart from this other person? Have I been taking the child to school? Have I been taking the child to, doctor's visits, taking the child to extracurriculars? What kind of quality time do I spend? So that there's a sense that the child would lose out if this parent is marginalized.
hmm One of the things I notice with a lot of people is they assume that the judge is going to believe them and not the other side. And that's the wrong assumption.
Right.
Sometimes, the judge wasn't there. The judge doesn't know what the truth is, right? Judge doesn't have a crystal ball. But the only way the judge is going to make a decision is if they do what you just suggested and humanize themselves with the judge. And I think that tends to make human beings or judges perhaps give you the benefit of the doubt in certain situations.
That's right. And, there's a lot that you can do. So, okay, so number one, you have to understand there's a presumption at law that if you are convicted of domestic violence, that you should lose custody. And the policy behind that is that victims, should have their peace of mind, be able to move on with their lives and not have to co-parent with someone who has hurt them. Okay.
Right.
But even in those circumstances where something bad has happened, the accused have a lot of recourse. Under Family Code 3044, you can do so much to rehabilitate yourself. You can take parenting classes. There's batterers intervention classes. Now, those are long, but they're very persuasive to the judge when you have fulfilled those obligations, because everybody knows it takes a lot of work to get through those classes. You can do individual therapy. You can do group therapy. You can go to, if something happened and alcohol was involved, you can go to Alcoholics Anonymous. I mean, don't you find that, Vince, if someone is accused, that the road to rehabilitation is often not exhausted, meaning someone's not telling them, hey, do an online course of parenting without conflict, et cetera, so that you can say, look, this did happen, but I've turned a new page, and here are all the things I've done to make sure that I'm not going to be in a high conflict situation with this parent in the future.
Yeah, I see that all the time, and a lot of times if I find myself telling people to perhaps take remedial classes, the anger management, the domestic violence, the parenting class. A lot of people are hesitant to do that because they believe that it is an admission of guilt. And I'm here to tell you that it is not.
Right.
And a lot of people don't want to take that hour or 2 hours per week to participate in those courses. Look, if you're you find yourself in a domestic violence situation, that's going to be paramount. I'm representing a guy right now in a domestic violence case in criminal court, and he denies the allegations, and I believe him. But I advised him, hey, get in a domestic violence class, get in an anger management class. And the resistance to doing that, was huge. Why should I have to do that? Why, doesn't she have to do anything? Why?
Right.
And I tell people, I said, listen, you might have hired me, because you thought I was an expert. Well, I'm pretty much an expert and I'm telling you to do this,
Right.
and, we'll use it to our benefit in the future. But a lot of people don't take my advice.
I know. It's pretty incredible to pay an attorney, whatever it is, $500 and up, with 23, sometimes 30 years of experience, and say, no thanks.
Right.
Like, what are you paying the attorney for? And it's like, we're not going to say the legal words to you because I'm trying to rebut the presumption at law and rehabilitate you and redeem you in the eyes of the court. We're not going to explain all that legal jargon to you because we know sometimes it just kind of flies over your head. But there's a lot of law behind these simple advisements that people are taking for granted.
Right.
It's like, go take a class, go go join a group, a parent support group for teenagers, and how to raise a teenager. And then, sometimes, during the teenage years, there's these big blowouts and the domestic violence pertains directly to the child. It's not always just the couple. I get a significant number of calls where parents and teens have a big blowout. And, one parent is asking me, well, can I get a restraining order against the other parent on behalf of my teenager? And I always tell them, well, age matters because, at a certain point, I think it's 12, Vincent. You can affirm if I'm right. I think it's 12, where the preferences of the child become a mandatory consideration for the court.
Right.
So the
And
child can, in their individual name, pursue a restraining order against a parent. Right?
that is correct. Don't see it all the time, but I do see it.
Yeah, it's there. Yeah.
And
Now, if the other parent does it, I think they have to get guardian ad litem first, or a status
right,
to do it on behalf of the child. But it can be done.
right. And it's important at the age of 12 when you use the word the judge must consider, the consideration. That doesn't mean that the judge has to do what the child wants or says.
Right.
Right. But at 12, we start considering it, and the sliding scale gets stronger and stronger as the child gets older. I had a judge once tell me many years ago, kid was like 17 and a half. And he told me, Mr. Davis, it really doesn't matter, what happened. The kid's 17 and a half. I'm not sending the kid back to your client
Right.
because
Yeah.
that's a recipe for more disaster.
Right. Tough, that's a tough one. And I think that's really why ultimately, even if you begin with a volatile situation, when a child is young, ultimately where you want to be as co-parents by the time that they're teenagers is having a functioning relationship to support each other, because teenagers can become very manipulative and play the parents against each other.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And when they know that there's that conflict, they tend to act up.
Yes. I was trying to think. I had volatile relations with my family when I was a teenager, maybe even before a teenager, like
That's surprising.
11 or 12. Oh,
I
yeah.
don't believe you.
Look, I tell this story to people, and they're quite surprised. When I was about 11 or 12, my dad came home, and he was going to give me a whipping, right, with the belt. He told me to go get the belt, and I told him no. And I was kind of a big kid, for 11 or 12, and my mother's Japanese, so I had to try to get some of that culture, keep some of the culture. I took martial arts, and I was big and bad, and I thought I could take my father. And, he beat the shit out of me.
I'm sorry.
He told me, I brought you in, I'll take you out.
Right.
You know, but the interesting thing is, it's probably one of the best things that ever happened to me as a kid, because I was going the wrong way, right?
Right. Well,
Uh,
that's what a
but
lot of
now,
parents.
but
Go
now
ahead.
he'd be arrested for child abuse now.
Exactly. He'd be in jail. Well, it's so funny because now kids know their rights, right?
Right,
So you talk to them the wrong way and they'll tell you that's abuse.
right.
You can't even look at them the wrong way, much less touch them these days. And a lot of parents are like, that's why they're going the wrong way. But what was normative and the standard then is definitely not the standard now. Whoopings, anything that can be considered a whooping, like with a cord or a belt or a switch or a tree branch, that is abuse. I don't care if your grandmother did it, your great granddaddy did it, and you got a whole line of whoopings in your family. That'll get you in jail these days. They will
Absolutely.
arrest you. Okay. There's just a whole new day. So
Society, all over the world is constantly changing, and things don't remain the same.
that's
And
right.
I think we have to be able to adapt to the situations. I forget what the Marines say, but
Mhm.
adapt and whatever to conquer and to be successful. And I think parents are going to have to do that too, or they should be doing it, because what my father's attitude was towards discipline is a crime today. It probably was
That's right.
crime back then, but it just wasn't enforced.
Oh yeah.
Right. But and you have
Same
to be
here. I consider my mom to be wonderful, and but some of the things that happened, it
so you have to
was
be
a different day. It was a different day.
you have to be cognizant as a parent today. I thought it was tough being a parent when I had children. It's additionally extra tough today because there's so many things, so many governmental oversights. The
Yeah,
police, the social workers, your spouse, if she gets upset with you or he gets upset with you,
right,
they're gonna weaponize those domestic violence laws against you. They're
right,
gonna do it. I see it. I see it.
right.
And a lot of people, they know about it when they come to me. I don't have to explain it to them. They already
Right,
know.
right. Well, speaking of standards changing, I think that it's a good thing that we no longer tolerate toxic abuse within relationships. Ladies and gentlemen, like you don't have to deal with a relationship that is harmful to you. If you're waking up depressed day in and day out and you can't be the person who you can be because of the way somebody's treating you, the way someone is talking to you, handling you, not having compassion for you, you should get out of that relationship because once it turns south and ugly, you've got a case on your hands. And why would you want to have children in a relationship that's so toxic? Imagine, raising a child with someone who's been abusive to you. And that's literally the situation most people find themselves in. It's like in family law, we don't cut off parents. We don't terminate parental rights like in juvenile dependency. That person is going to have some level of contact with the child, whether it's supervised visitation or just, a marginalized visitation just on the weekends and a midweek. But you're going to have to deal with the parent of that child. And, you should think about it early on when you're in relationships and deciding, your life, like whether or not this is the kind of person I would want to either raise a child with or have to co-parent with, because that's what it's going to shake out to be. And if you're
Right.
not dealing with someone who's, mature and decent toward you, your life is going to be a living hell. And it's going to take a lot of court intervention to you know, put some restraints on that relationship so that you can live and be normal and have a healthy child.
I have a question for you.
Hmm.
This actually happened recently with a potential client it's a client now. Young woman, alleges domestic violence against the father of the baby, um, and has been, apparently it's been an ongoing thing, and it's been escalating and escalating. Finally, a event happens. The woman calls 911. Okay. Police come. Now, the father thinks that he's going to explain his position to the police, and nothing's going to happen. They end up arresting the father, taking him to jail. And the client now says, "Oh my God, I've ruined our family." Right? What do you say to that client?
I say, you are a true victim. So much so that even when there's an objective standard being used, probable cause that a crime has occurred, a crime against you, your personhood as a woman, as a mother, you still want to hold on to that relationship. And so I would tell that client that they need intensive psychotherapy, maybe even a day program, an outpatient day program where, it's support groups, it's life mapping. What are you going to do after you get out? How are you going to sustain yourself? So a lot of times these women are beholden to the abusers because they
Right.
were the providers,
Hmm.
because they literally cannot live without them and they're not ready to go out there and get a job. But I submit to you that going back to school and getting a job and doing things yourself is preferable than living under that abuse, because it can become deadly. It can become deadly. And so if he's arrested, that means there was probable cause that a crime has occurred. And it's very serious. I see that a lot, Vince, where people literally want to reconcile after these, after the state gets involved. I just had a case where literally the mother was used to just leaving the children with dad, had 3 children, and going off to do whatever she did days and days at a time. They have a blowout. He finally has enough, and decides, I'm going to file for custody, mentions that to her. She comes with her brothers and her family members, breaks and enters into the home, jumps the father, beats him up, takes all the kids, right? And then files a restraining order against him. And because she's the woman, when the police came, they arrest him, even though he's the one who had the children and his house was broken into. And so these two people, while there's cross restraining orders against each other, decide to reconcile. And I knew it. I'm like, these crazy, toxic relationships where they literally fight and have sex, fight and have sex. And that's their pattern. And that's exactly what they did. So they ended up dropping the restraining orders against each other. And then the mother decided not to testify against him for the criminal case. But I mean, it was so ugly and so messy. And the kids are already so messed up. And they can't even see it. When I met the client, he brought the 3 children to my office. And, because I've been doing this for a long time and I'm a mother of 3 children myself, you can see certain issues a mile away. You know, this child, this child has autism. It's not being treated. This child has social anxiety. Um, they're non-communicative. They're all developmentally delayed. And it's from being in a household where all the time is spent bickering and fighting. And it's really sad just how, how the kids get messed up. And those are the worst relationships because they go on and it goes undetected. And, the victim doesn't want to testify against the abuser.
Talk a little bit more about what domestic violence does to the child or children, because I don't think a lot of people believe that or even consider it.
hmm hmm Well, it's something that people should take a little bit of time to explore, because once you know what domestic violence is in California, you can better understand the psychological effects. So, constant bickering, something that happens in a lot of households. Kids overhear that. And when they're young, they don't understand it. They ask a lot of questions like, why are you arguing? Are you arguing over me? Am I the reason why you're fighting? Are you so unhappy over me? Am I a burden to you because you're taking care of me? And kids form um, the worst of conclusions, even about themselves. When you don't have a peaceful household, it affects how your personality develops. A lot of people you see as adults that have like high anxiety or depression, some of that comes from instability in the household when they were very young. Meaning, when there's just a lot of turmoil around you, it causes psychological angst. And you grow up just being afraid. If you can't sleep in peace and live in peace, and you're afraid at home when you come home from school, guess how you're going to feel growing up? You're going to be less likely to form healthy social relationships. You're more likely to mimic that behavior in your friendships and have low quality friendships and social relationships. You're more likely to have toxic relationships as you become, romantically involved. You're more likely to have a drug and alcohol problem. I mean, the statistics are really compelling how messed up people get from experiencing childhood abuse. And even though it's not directed directly at them, when you see your mother, try to stab your dad, right? Or your mother or your dad pop your mother in the face, okay, that leaves an indelible impression in the mind of the child, and it contorts and distorts personality development. It triggers anxiety. And I mean, school performance should be the last of your concerns, but of course, that child is not going to school and able to concentrate and function properly because they're worried. And so that's why it is important to get children out of these homes, and I am not supportive of the current system that we have. It needs to be revamped first. Okay. But if there's a relative or a friend, or if you can catch it before the state gets involved, please do so. Please exit these relationships and run for your life with your child and seek custody in court, because you're killing them softly. It's not happening in a moment where it's, you take the child out, within 5 seconds with a gun. But what you're doing is you're killing them softly, and you're eroding their mental peace and distorting their personality and their psychological peace so that they are messed up long term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
About what percentage of your practice, your family law practice, are there issues of domestic violence involved?
I would say at least 60.
Okay.
I'd say all of the divorces and all of the custody cases I get almost always have some element of it. Now, it may not have been filed. I have judgment calls to make as an attorney when clients tell me, and sometimes they miss it. They don't see it as domestic violence.
Right.
But when they sit there and start describing what's happening, I'm obligated to say, here are certain options you have. And the ones that are really abused don't want to put a restraining order against them because they're afraid for their lives. Like, this man will kill me if I do this, So it's pretty common in the cases that I get. There's almost always some element of it. I don't always pursue it. I try to protect the client maybe without filing a temporary restraining order and just get her custody. But it's almost always there. How about you, Vince?
I would say about 50, 60%.
Okay.
It's high. It's very high.
Yeah, it's sad.
What I've also noticed is a correlation between substance abuse issues and domestic violence.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's not something, people always bring up.
Yeah.
Right? Are there substance abuse issues going on here? Well, now that you mention it, blah, blah, blah,
Right. And those are the worst cases because I mean, parental competency, like, are you a functioning parent, right? Can you get your kid to school on time, right? Are you doing the thing? Are you cooking for your kids or making sure that they eat 3 meals a day plus 2 snacks? You know, like you're now talking about someone's basic ability to function as a parent. And just like people don't see the domestic violence and how it distorts the children, they also don't see themselves as having a problem. I mean,
Right.
I was in court the other day. I had just gotten a case. Had very little time to prepare, but I read all the transcripts and all the pleadings, and I knew what the allegations against my client were. And, and I just met her for the first time. And literally, I'm speaking to her face to face, one on one, and I can smell alcohol on her breath. And here we are in court, and the allegation is that you have a problem and you're unstable. Not making my job easy.
When that type of thing happens, do you refer them to any type of AA, substance abuse problem, or do you, you know,
I have a come to Jesus talk with them.
okay,
Because sometimes you don't walk on the battlefield, handicapped or hobbling on one foot. You got to make sure both your legs are solid, the cast is off, you don't need your crutches, and you're able to walk on and present yourself as a solid parent. It
hmm
would have taken the judge less than 2 seconds of her talking to see that there is a deep, deep issue. So sometimes you just have to protect your client from themselves, and you have to have a come to Jesus talk with them. Like, look, we can come back here another day, but you've got to clean your life up. You know, you got to get stable. You've got to get a job. You've got to get transportation. How can I say you should have custody of the child if you have nowhere to bring her?
hmm
You know? So I can get you off this drug and alcohol testing, but you're still going to have a problem
right,
because if you're using, you're not going to be able to be a good parent
right.
and you're going to endanger your daughter, you know?
I had a case one time where the father was alleging the mother was a substance abuse user, specifically methamphetamine, and my client adamantly denied it. Adamantly
Hmm.
denied it. And we were having a conference with the judge, and the judge said, "Well, something like that. Would your client take a drug test?" And I'm thinking, "Yeah, no problem." That's what I'm thinking. I
Right.
said, "Let me go check with her."
Yeah.
I go check with her, and it's, "No, Mr.
Right.
Davis, I
Oh,
can't do it."
no.
"You can't do it." Like, "Why?"
Right. I don't want
"Well,
anybody know the results.
well, okay, got it."
Yeah, yeah. And you know what's crazy is that usually where meth is involved, they're both involved in it to some degree. It's not just, meth users and non-meth users don't coexist. That's one of those drugs where you've seen those before and after pictures, right?
Mhm, mhm.
It messes you up. One day you look like a healthy person, the next day a troll. So, it's usually if it's involved, it's to some degree both parents. And it's like, what do you do?
When you have an opportunity to file a domestic violence case, say you're representing the alleged victim, do you have any filing preferences with respect to location?
I love downtown LA. I think we have the smartest judges there, the most experienced, the most capable, the most fair. And I think they see so many thousands and thousands of cases, and how they're presented from the top attorneys. I mean, and I'll say the top attorneys in the world because I mean, LA, New York, come on. The finest schools are here. You're dealing with some really, hotshot attorneys. So I think they have a really good balanced view of the spectrum of the kind of case and the
hmm
severity of the consequences imposed from the slightest, okay, you sent some bad text messages to someone got punched in the face and they're in the hospital. Okay.
Right. We briefly talked about this at the beginning this morning, but tell me, when you are involved in a domestic violence case, either as the victim or the the alleged victim or the alleged perpetrator, what
Mhm.
type of financial consequences are looming, with the outcome of these hearings?
Well, you have to understand that if you do get convicted of of an act of domestic violence and a permanent restraining order issues, there are life consequences there. First of all, you're going to be in the a database that is assembled, to collect information about people who have committed domestic violence. So, for teachers, for firefighters, for people who need a DOJ clearance, that's the Department of Justice, you need to take a fingerprint background check. You're no longer going to pass those background checks. It's going to pop up. Now, it may be something you can explain, and it may not be game over for that particular employer, but for most of them, having a restraining order against you is game over. In other words, it can affect your job. Even for private employers, they do comprehensive background checks that you agree to as a condition of applying for the position.
Hmm.
They can pick up the information as well. And so it can have devastating consequences financially for your future ability to earn a living. And that's why one of the main solutions we employ when we're trying not to do someone in, and it's not that bad, we just employ using a temporary restraining order for as little as 6 months up to 3 years. It can have the same length, in other words, force and effect, as a permanent restraining order. It's just that if it's temporary, it doesn't get processed through the system the same way. So that's one negotiating technique that you can use.
Tell me about impacts on child support, spousal support, financially.
Well, you know, child support is based upon timeshare. Okay. And for spousal support, you have Family Code 4320K and other issues that the judge may deem just and proper to consider. And so in both instances where the victim ends up with the lion's share of custody, you're going to be paying the maximum child support because you will have very limited visitation with your child. And in terms of spousal support, it is one of those factors that the court can consider. Court can consider in the restraining order giving someone temporary housing, giving someone counseling reimbursement, moving costs, um, issue money for just setting up your life again and leaving because you left and you don't have a TV and a refrigerator and all. The court can fashion orders that are necessary to just help the victim start their lives over again, and they
Right.
can do it quickly within the restraining order. And I think it is critical that if you represent the person who's not making as much money, make sure you pursue child and spousal support through the restraining order. You don't have to file it separately so that you can get the money that you need to leave and not return.
Very good. That's a very good strategy tip tomorrow. Very good
Mhm.
strategy tip. You know,
Mhm.
we're coming towards the end of our show today.
Mhm.
And all of you that are watching or will be watching, if you have any questions, please give Tamara a call. She's a certified family law specialist. Her number is right there, 310-271-7675. Or you can give me a call at 888-888-6582. Before we wrap up tomorrow, any last words of wisdom you want to give these folks?
You know, the biggest decision you're going to make in your life is who you marry, who you have a child with. That is going to have the most significant and lasting consequence, not just on your financial ability, to earn a living, but on your peace of mind and your long-term sense of health and happiness. Choose carefully, choose wisely, believe people for what they say and how they present themselves to you. If you're in a dating relationship and you see that someone has very little consideration isn't affectionate, isn't loving toward you, has very little kindness in their heart, isn't thoughtful, or worse yet, is mean and insulting and dismissive of you, don't stay in those relationships. Run for your life and get yourself in a situation. There's plenty of wonderful people in this world who are nice, kind, and considerate, and build your life with someone where you can have a stable and happy home rather than children who are messed up and adult children who are messed up for their lives. You'll thank yourself into eternity.
That's great advice, Tamara. You know, this has been all about divorce and family law. And we come to you on this live stream every Sunday at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. And we'll see everyone next week, Super Bowl Sunday, next week at 9 a.m. All righty. So before the game, check us out. All righty. Thanks, Tamara. And I'll see you next
Thank
week.
you, Vince. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.